Welcome back to the Joel Oriend Show.
Fellas, listen up. All you ever asked for is an opportunity. You got it today. Where else would you rather be than right here, right now?
On 92.1 The Team.
Alrighty, well, let's talk some Buffalo Bills, shall we? I know it's the off season and the regular season rapidly approaching. It doesn't look like we'll have a preseason, which is, okay with me. I'm not a huge preseason football guy. Partly because I'm not a huge fan of one team. If I was, a huge fan of one team, I think you probably, watch that team and, are interested in who's going to, make the cut and who's going to be the second string guard and all that stuff. I do like to see, some of the long shots. Sometimes there'll be a long shot here and there on a team that you kind of root for, hope to, like a Rudy or something, that you hope make a squad. But the regular season is approaching. So before we really drill down and look at this year's team and really kind of get rolling with that, we're going to have Eric Wood on here in the near future. Of course, he is the color analyst. We had John Murphy on as well, the play-by-play of the Buffalo Bills. And, because they've made it to the playoffs here, obviously last year with Houston, a couple years ago against Jacksonville, times are much better now in Buffalo. But I would say through the aughts and most, half of the teens, it was some slim pickings and some rough times. And when you're going through rough times, sometimes you go back to things that comfort you, like comfort food, right? I know I've fallen back to comfort food with the COVID-19 I've put on. Or, a lot of times, especially in the summer, classic rock and classic hits comes back into popularity, into fad, because it reminds us of when we were teenagers and young and didn't have bills to pay and wives to make happy and all that stuff. So we have a tendency to, listen to that music from the 80s and 90s if you're my age in the mid-40s. And if you're Bills fans during that time, you certainly look back on those times in the late 80s and the early to almost mid-90s. That run between 88 and 93 was incredible. Of course, we've had Wade Phillips on. He was the guy that took over for Marv Levy. Made it to the playoffs. Didn't have a losing season, but could not get it done, and he was let go. And, of course, the Flutie Johnson thing. And so people fondly look back on it, and it's one of those things where when you're winning that much, you always think that's the way it's going to be. I mean, if you asked a UCLA Bruins fan in the 70s, they probably thought it would always be like that. If you asked Notre Dame football fans in the 80s, they probably always thought it was going to be like that. So you have a tendency to get a little spoiled. And I think now fans certainly look back on that and say, wow, that was an incredible run, all those Hall of Famers, some incredible games. Of course, we've played some of the classic replays right here on 92.1 The Team, the greatest comeback of all time, Bills versus the Houston Oilers. So we wanted to get someone on who really can break it down. And I've gone back and we've done some research as well to look at some of the games. But this guy, he is a Buffalo Bills expert with a great book, and it is the Buffalo Bills game-by-game summary. And he is a freelance writer. He's got some great stuff out there. His name is Chris Stucchio, and let's bring him on. Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me,
Chris. So, how long did this book? Now, you're in the Buffalo area, correct? That's where you reside.
Absolutely. I was born in Buffalo, and I've lived here my entire life. I'm 53 years old now, so I've experienced it all as a Buffalo Bills fan.
So how long did it take to compile this book and put this all together?
Well, that's a great question. My methodology for the book was actually quite simple. I reviewed box scores on the Pro Football Reference website for every game the Bills played during their glory years. Then once I finished doing a summary, I searched for newspaper articles about the game so I could find interesting post-game quotes to use in the book and also to confirm details and facts I remembered and wanted to include as well. Basically, I worked on it 7 days a week for about 5 to 6 hours a day, and after 2 months, I had a solid first draft together. Eventually, I reached an agreement with Mascot Books to publish it in late September of 2019, and I got my first copies of my first official copies of the book at the end of March 2020, and then the official retail release date for Buffalo football, a game-by-game summary of the glory years, was July 7th, and now it's available on Amazon and a couple other online retail stores, and I'm getting to chat about it with you, so it's pretty awesome.
And let me tell you, because I've done some research, and we've done some research, and we've gathered some stats, and so I'm just telling people, you got to get this book, because the time that Chris has taken, it's worth the money, because to do what he did, let me tell you, I haven't done near what he did in research. It can be time consuming, especially when you don't have high-speed internet. So I'm telling you, what he's done is going to save you a lot of time. Now, Chris, there's a couple games I want to delve into you with, but not necessarily the Super Bowls, because obviously the Super Bowls are talked about a ton. But there's a couple games I thought were pretty interesting in each of those years that I thought you may not remember necessarily quite as well. But before we get to that, now you're 53. Now, what have you done? I know you're a freelance writer. You worked for a lot of other places. Just kind of give us a quick little rundown and bio of you.
Well, I've been writing and editing professionally for about 20 years now. I spent 9 years doing writing and editing for one of the biggest law firms in Buffalo. I did the writing and editing for the attorneys there from 2003 to 2012, and then I went on my own in 2012, so I've been freelancing since then. Prior to that, I graduated from Buffalo State College in 1990 with a BA in English, and actually my first job in corporate America, though, was in sales for the world's largest computer distributor, Ingram Micro. Mm-hmm. And after having a couple of different sales jobs and sales and marketing jobs, I got back to what I really wanted to do, which was write and edit professionally, and I was able to start doing that full-time in 2003 for that law firm, so that was pretty cool.
So you and I kind of got going at the same time. I got into radio, graduated from Syracuse in about 90. Well, I graduated in 99, got in around 2000 or so. So we're kind of coming in at the same time. And Chris, it makes me wonder. Now, you're a little older than me, but as you mentioned, Pro Football Reference, when I do this show and we're like, I wonder this or I wonder that, I wonder what people did in the 70s and 80s. Like, this would have been a monumental task for you, Chris, if you were trying to do this for like the Buffalo Bills heydays in the mid 60s in the early 80s without Pro Football Reference.
Without the internet and without Pro Football Reference, it would have been a Herculean task, I think, for sure. And I don't know if I would have even known how to do it, but it would have taken years probably to go through all the games and find newspapers and find the newspaper articles the old-fashioned way at the library. And I don't think it would have been possible. So I don't know if Al Gore invented the internet, but whoever did, I want to thank that person.
I mean, I hate listening to the show back, but when I do, it's amazing how many times I say, Tanner, look this up. Tanner, Google this. Tanner, look this up. I don't know what they did in sports talk radio before the internet. They must have had to, like you said, go to the library and know their Dewey Decimal System and stuff. Because
you're right. No, I totally agree with you. I've been listening to talk radio, sports talk radio for a long time, and I have a greater appreciation for what it was like back then. Absolutely.
Well, I think the bottom line is those guys had to know what they were talking about. You had to watch the games. You had to read the newspaper. You had to be up on stuff. So we'll get to Tanner here in a minute. We'll get his first question. I kind of want to bounce back and forth between current day and some of the games in the years in the book. So you started in '88, is that correct?
Yeah, the first game. Well, the summaries start at the first game of the 1988 season for the Bills, which was a home game against the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings they were a good team. They had made it to the NFC title game the year before and almost had a chance to tie that title game, or they did have a chance to tie that title game in the last minute, but a 4th and goal pass into the end zone went off the hands of a running back, and Washington was able to run out the clock. So it was a good test and a game I remember well. But the book starts with a short chapter on the 1987 season. Okay. Not a game-by-game summary, but just more of a general overview, because the Bills took a significant step forward that year, and it was clear the foundation for greatness was in place. So that's kind of why I start with a short chapter about that. But then the game-by-game summary started in the first game of the '88 season.
Yeah, I think that's great. Like you said, I think that was really the big step from 87 to 88. So real quickly, for people who don't remember, they go 13-5. Again, I'm counting postseason games here. 7-1 in the AFC. And again, when you go back and look, and I have some numbers, but we know how the Pats have dominated the AFC East. The Bills during this run really were the monsters of the AFC East. It obviously wasn't as long as the Pats run, but 7-1 in the AFC. They were 9-0 at home that year. Won the AFC East. They were 14th in points scored, 3rd in defense with points given up against teams with winning records 8-4. Now, there was a game that kind of jumped out at me. Games decided by 3 points or less, they were 5-1. So they were still playing a lot of close games. When we think of that Kelly gun, they're putting up a lot of points, still kind of relying on defense here in the 88 season. And the one game that jumped out at me, just because the score was weird, was week 14 at the 3-10 Bucks. They lose to Vinny Testaverde and the Bucks 10-5. They had 40 yards rushing, and Kelly threw 2 picks. Now, we do see Northeast teams, even Brady seems to struggle down in Miami, especially December, January. I think it might be a little bit because of, going from the cold weather down to that heat, and they're used to playing in it. But did that game jump out at you just because it was a weird score? They scored a field goal and a safety, but was that a surprise? Because they were really rolling at the time. They were a big favorite going into that game. So that was kind of like a toe stubber when I looked at that real quick.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up because according to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers website, that's the only time an NFL game has ended in that score, 10-5. So right. The fact that it jumped out to you is, I find that very interesting because some people have read it and said they were very surprised. They didn't know that was the only time a game has ended in that score. But in that year, just a couple of things about that game and about that year. Bills were still really more of a run-first team in 88, right. And they had this kind of conservative run and stop the run mentality to a large extent. They weren't running the no huddle, the fast-paced no huddle full time at all, unless it was the end of a game and they were in a desperate situation. So that's why the offense was kind of middle, and it was the strength of the team, as you said, was the defense. Yep. In that Tampa Bay game, that was actually a very significant loss because the Bills, as you said, they were undefeated at home that year. Yep. And so were the Cincinnati Bengals. That loss actually prevented the Bills from getting home field advantage throughout the playoffs. If they had won that game, the AFC title game, which was in Cincinnati that year, and the Bills lost 21-10, that would have been in Buffalo. And I still think to this day that if Buffalo had gotten home field advantage that year, that they would have played in their first Super Bowl that season, because they were a different team at home that year than they were on the road. And so it was a very significant loss. I remember watching the game and just being like, why are we having so much trouble? Why does Tampa Bay look like the Chicago Bears defense of 1985? And it was just one of those days, though. Yeah,
it was. Now, so I think one of their first significant wins, though, really that you could put on your wall, because, again, they really were hanging their hat on their defense, right? So they go to Houston in the playoffs, and they beat Warren Moon, and that was a run-and-shoot offense. They were the second highest offense in the football that year. They go down and win 17-10. So I think that was a big win for the Bills. They move on, as you mentioned, to the Bengals. Kelly does not have a great game. He's 14 for 30, 163 yards and 3 interceptions. Bills only had 181 yards on offense. Bengals had 249. So Bengals did enough to move on, and as you mentioned, go to the Super Bowl. Let's jump to 89. Okay.
Oh, can I just mention one thing?
Go ahead.
That 88 playoff game with the Oilers, that was actually at Rich Stadium. I was at that game.
Okay.
That was actually the first home playoff game in the history of Rich Stadium. So that's why it was so exciting. And I was there, and the atmosphere was electric all afternoon.
Wow.
But yeah, you're right. It was the defense was the strength, and I was surprised. I was so worried about playing Warren Moon in that offense, but they held him and thankfully, it was 17-10. The Bills punted deep from their own territory to the Oilers, and the Oilers were going to have a chance to tie it with a little under 2 minutes to play. And they fumbled. Steve Tasker, I believe, tackled the returner. He fumbled it, and it was recovered either by Tasker or someone else. But there was a great special teams play, and I just remember thinking, oh God, thank God Warren Moon didn't have another chance to tie it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't really, because see, I grew up on the. I'm not originally from Western New York. I'm on the other side of Binghamton. Now, obviously, there was still a lot of Bills fans just east of Binghamton. A lot of Giants fans as well, but certainly knew a lot of Bills fans and certainly saw a lot of Bills games on TV, especially with their run. So 89, still a pretty good year. They're 6-2 at home, 6-2 in the East. They win the AFC East. They're 6-4 against teams with winning records. They're third on offense, so they've jumped on offense from 14th to 3rd. The defense goes from 3rd to 14th, so they're scoring 15 points a game, almost 26. They're giving up 19.8. Games decided by one score or less. I always like to look at that, Chris, because it's interesting. You never know. I mean, it looks like it's 21-14 on paper. Who knows? They could have scored the touchdown with 1 second to go to make it 21-14, so it really wasn't that close. But just looking on paper, 3-4 in games decided by one score or less. They beat Houston 47-41 early on in that season, so now they're really running on all cylinders. They get revenge on Cincinnati, 24-7. So they get revenge, losing to the Bengals in the playoffs. Lost at home, Week 14. I thought this was an interesting loss. Week 14, 8-5 against a 7-7 Saints team. Saints come to Rich Stadium, and again, they're a dome team, and beat the Bills 22-19. And I looked. Now, the weather says it was. I was like, well, maybe it was a balmy, 50 degrees. It says it was 26 degrees. So I thought that was an interesting loss. Again, maybe one of those trap games. And then they lost in the divisional round to Cleveland, 34-30. It was 31-24 in the fourth. Kelly threw for over 400 yards in that game, 4 TDs and 2 interceptions. Kozar. A lot of people forget Bernie Kosar. He was pretty good in his day. The side armor, 250, 3 TDs. So Bernie kind of wins that duel between former Miami quarterbacks. Cleveland had the 4th best D that year. What jumps out at you with that 89 team?
Well, it's interesting, again, that you brought up that Saints game. I was at that Saints game, and it was a snowy, wintry day, and they actually started a backup quarterback, John Forcade. I thought, we're going to win this game easily, and we struggled, though. And it came down, I think Morton Anderson kicked a field goal late. That was the difference. And that was another game that, that season, that 89 season for the Bills, it was often referred to as the bickering Bills because they had some off the field things going on, or just some conflicts between some of the players, some dissension, I guess. And but they ended up winning the division with a 9-7 record. And then that Cleveland playoff game that you mentioned is probably one of the 3 best playoff games I've ever seen. Not just for the Bills, but overall 3 best NFL games I've ever seen. It was a back and forth game. Kelly was magnificent in defeat. He actually threw, with 12 seconds left, what appeared to be the game-winning touchdown in the left corner of the end zone to running back, a great pass-receiving running back, Ronnie Harmon, but Harmon wasn't able to hold on, and on the next play, he was intercepted at the 2-yard line by Clay Matthews, and that's how Cleveland was able to hang on. But if you look at Cleveland, that was kind of the first time the Bills, that Cleveland game, they opened things up right from the start. They came out with totally out of character, came out in a shotgun with four receivers, and Kelly ran for most of the second half. They used the fast-paced no-huddle offense, and that's what they started in 1990 when they, about the middle of that season, they went to it full-time, but that's kind of where it really started in that 89 playoff game where they started to open things up. So that's what kind of I remember about it. You could see that this team was going to start, if they're going to go down, they were going to go down passing the ball and being aggressive from now on. And it carried over to 1990 for sure, the first Super Bowl season. Yeah,
like you said, so you can kind of see that transition, 87, 88, 89, where, Marv and, who was it? Was that maybe Marchabrota? I don't think it was Bresnahan yet that came in. I think they were...
Oh, you're right. It was Marchabrota.
Yeah, I think they started to say, let's just put the ball in Kelly's hand a little bit more. Let's run this fast pace. Although, I still hear Boomer Esiason to this day get upset that the Bills get too much credit for that K-gun and no huddle. He said him and Sam were doing it long before the Bills, but the Bills did it so well for that period of time from 89 to 93 that, people think of Kelly and those Bills, but they did run, the no huddle there as well. But that certainly, as you mentioned, they're getting better. And I did have to Google because, I remember I was thinking, okay, I looked at the Saints game and I'm like, okay, that's probably. Oh, it's probably Bobby Hebert or Billy Joe Tolliver or Jim Everett. And then I look and it's something called John Forcade was the quarterback. I'm like, holy moly. I had to double check. I'd never heard of him. He came in. He probably remembers that game to this day. Tanner, why don't you jump in here and ask Chris one of your first questions?
So there was an article on The Athletic not too long ago where they did somewhat of a power ranking of the 25 most dominant teams of the past 50 years, and they gave each franchise's most dominant team, and they said that the 1990 Bills were the most dominant Bills team, and that ranked 32nd overall on the list of some of the most dominant teams of the past 50 years, and their justification was their point differential against winning teams. It was plus 51 in 1990, which was the best out of any Bills playoff team since 1970. And overall, the Bills Super Bowl teams went 32-20 against teams with winning records with a 1.6 point differential in those games. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and as well, which Bills team do you think out of the 4 Super Bowl teams was the best?
Oh, that's another great question. I without question think it's I think the 1990 Bills are not only the best Bills team to make it to the Super Bowl, but they're probably the best team that never won a Super Bowl overall. Mm-hmm. Not just talking about the Bills franchise. Right. The Bills in that year that they went to the fast-paced no huddle in the middle of the year, and when they started doing that, they were blowing teams out, and they were putting up video game type numbers while doing it. And when they got to the Super Bowl, by the time they got to the Super Bowl, they were the best team in football, and they were an overwhelming favorite to win it all. And in that Super Bowl loss to the Giants, the Giants just came up with a great defensive plan and played about as well as they could have. Well, the Bills just didn't play their best game, yet it still came down to a field goal attempt at the end. In fairness to Scott Norwood, I think I read he was like 0 for 5 on grass from field goal attempts of 47 yards or more before that kick, so it would have been a Herculean effort for him to make it. But I do think that 1990 Bills team is not only the best Bills team ever, but the best team to never win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think they're probably the best out of the bunch, and it is interesting. They probably are one of the best to never get a ring. 15-4, 7-1 in the division, 10-0 at home that year. Won the AFC East. Games decided by one score or less, 4-1. So here's just a couple games that jump out at me, Chris. Just because I would just run down the schedule of each year, and any score or a game against a team that I thought, well, that team probably stunk that year. Why is that game so close or whatever? Week 9. 8-1 Bills host the 1-8 New England Patriots. Kelly goes 5 for 15 for 79 yards. Thurman has 2 rushing touchdowns. The score was actually 7-0 going into the fourth quarter. This was not a Tom Brady or Drew Bledsoe led team. The guy that started that day, and I believe it was for Coach. I don't think McPherson was there yet. Probably Ron Meyer. Was Mark Wilson was the quarterback for the Patriots. They got the win, but boy, they had to really fight for their life during that game against the Pats, Chris.
Yeah, I actually, that was the first year the only year I had season tickets, and I was at that game, and I thought the same. If I'm not mistaken, we scored a touchdown early, and I thought, okay, this is exactly how it's going to go according to plan. And then fourth quarter, I remember thinking it's still 7-0, and the Patriots probably, I think we won the turnover. The Bills won the turnover differential that day, but I think the Patriots they gave us a scare, and it wasn't until Thurman Thomas had a long touchdown run late to make it 14-0. But that game could have gone either way, and I remember sitting in the fourth quarter like, what's going going on? We're way better than this team. But that's, and the NFL is so much about week-to-week matchups. You really just never know how it's going to turn out, and that's why they play the games, as they say, right?
No doubt about it. So, and again, I didn't realize this, and again, I wasn't a huge Bills fan, and of course, there wasn't really Sports Center in 1990, or at least, I lived out in the country. I didn't get cable. There wasn't the Red Zone, so you didn't see all these games necessarily, and I probably wasn't a real big person on reading the newspaper in 1990. I was in 7th grade, so you had to force me and quiz me to read things if I was going to get graded. But what I didn't realize, and we talk about this a lot, and it was a huge story in 2007, right? When the Giants beat the undefeated Patriots in the Super Bowl. Remember, they played that final week, and Coughlin did not rest his guys. They played them hard, but they lost. I did not realize this, and I'm sure they probably talked about it back in 1990 on the pregame show. I did not realize the Bills and the Giants had, I've seen the game a ton, the Super Bowl. We've interviewed guys from it. I did not realize they had played in the regular season that year. Week 14, the Bills were 11-2, Giants were 11-2. Bills won that game 17-13. And
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, that was a key match. I remember that game well, and it was a lot of people thought that could be a preview of Super Bowl 25 at the time it was played, and it was kind of a cold, rainy day on the road for the Bills, and I remember Giants, I think, took the lead, but then the Bills scored 2 quick touchdowns with the no huddle. I remember thinking, wow, we look awesome. And then Kelly got injured, and he was out for several weeks after that. I remember thinking, oh, my gosh, our Super Bowl dreams could just have gone down the drain. But then later in that game, Phil Simms, the starting quarterback for the Giants, got injured, and he never played again that year. That's why Hostetler was the starting quarterback in Super Bowl 25.
Yes.
So that's the game that Simms got injured in too. And I remember it was just a really hard-fought defensive game. And if you looked at it on paper, I think the Giants you probably would have thought the Giants would have won, but the Bills in the second half were able to hang on. It was, I believe, the final was 17-13, and I remember thinking, it just seemed like the Giants were going to win that game, and they just could never get that score to get ahead. So I remember that game well, and it was definitely. It had a different feel to it with the two backup quarterbacks in it, and not knowing when Kelly was going to come back and if or when Simms was going to come back, and he never made it back the rest of that year.
Well, and I think two things jump out at me. One, I think that hurt the Bills because sure, Parcells and Belichick would have been able to watch the Bills on tape, but that gave them an opportunity to see the Bills live in person, right? So that gave them a real good chance to see the Bills and get ready for the Super Bowl. And it looks to me, Chris, like they kind of knew what they wanted to do in the formula because you look back at it, total plays, Giants had 68, Bills had 50. Time of possession, 38 minutes for the Giants, 22 for the Bills. First downs, 20 for the Giants, 13 for the Bills. So that's kind of what they tried to do in the Super Bowl. It didn't work in the regular season, but it looks like, it looked like Parcells and Belichick, and some, give Belichick credit for the greatest game plan of all time in that Super Bowl in 1990. It looks like they were kind of on what they wanted to do in that game. They just didn't execute it as well as they did in the Super Bowl.
I think you're right, and I know that I was reading an article recently from ESPN about was basically saying that Thurman Thomas should have won the MVP in Super Bowl 25, despite the fact that the Bills lost. He had 15 carries for like 135 yards, and he had 5 receptions for, I think, 55 yards. He was fantastic that day. But it said that in the second half of the Super Bowl, the Giants basically went to a 2-5 defenses and 5 linebackers just to make it difficult for the Bills to have their passing routes over the middle. And it was basically, that's when Thurman Thomas gained a lot of his yards.
Right.
He was fantastic. So they were basically making the Bills, they were saying to the Bills, you're not going to win this game passing the ball.
Right.
And I do think that having the that seeing the Bills in person and what they could do and how devastating the passing game could be if you didn't take it away, I think that definitely helped the Giants in the Super Bowl because they knew that their best chance was to keep the ball on the ground, control the clock and make the Bills be a little more patient and run the football to try to get points. And it still came down to that field goal attempt, but the Giants won that game, and that was probably one of the greatest coaching efforts ever.
Yeah, and that's why you can't just always go off of a game on paper, like you're saying, because when you look at the stats, again, you would think the Bills would have maybe won that game, or it isn't the way I remember. When I look at the stats now, the way I remember, it felt like Otis Anderson just was running forever and just kept getting first down after first down, and it didn't seem like the Giants even had to pass that much. But when you look at the stats, like you said, the Giants started sagging on the defense, and basically, as Belichick has said, he was trying to play off of Kelly's ego and saying, okay, you want to run this no huddle, you like to throw, we're going to give you the run. We're going to lay down on the run, but we're going to try to stop you from passing, and we'll see if your ego gets in the way and if you're willing to start handing off the ball. They did. It just seemed to be just a tad too late. He did the same thing against Peyton Manning many a times, trying to bait Manning into throwing the ball instead of running it. But when you look at it, the Bills ran for 166. The Giants ran for 172. The Bills passed for 212. This is the part I don't remember. The Giants went 20 for 32 for 222 in the air. It felt to me like they hardly ever had to pass, only on third down when they didn't get the first down on running. But that's when you look at the stats, the Bills certainly matched up, as you mentioned. Thurman had a great day. Otis was only 21 carries for 102, but as a Bills fan, Chris, it must have felt like he ran for about 250 yards because they always ran for about an inch more than he needed on third down.
That's exactly right. I mean, a lot of those yards it seemed like the Giants, whenever they had a third down, they would just, like you said, just barely pick it up and then be first down and then more time off the clock. And same with the passes. I remember one play, one receiver, I don't know, he broke like 4 or 5 tackles. It was like a 3rd and 12, and he broke 4 or 5 tackles to pick up the first down by like an inch. That's what I remember about that game. Just everything that had to go right for the Giants on offense did, and they had timely passing. And like you said, it seemed like they ran the ball forever. But statistically, it just seemed that way because it seemed like they were just they got the first downs by an inch or two, and that's really what I remember too. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and I do think you're right too about the Bills maybe starting to run the ball more. Maybe they started running the ball sooner or emphasizing the run more. It might have been a different outcome, but I think I don't know what was discussed on the sideline if Kelly was ever told to do that or not. But that's an interesting point.
It is, and it's, listen, sometimes it's tough to go away from your bread and butter. You do what you do. It got you there. Sometimes you say, hey, this is what we do. So you could certainly understand that. Tanner, go ahead. Ask Chris your next question.
We spent a lot of time talking about the glory days here, but we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the state of Bills football today. They had a very solid offseason, signing guys like Vernon Butler, Quinton Jefferson, Josh Norman, not breaking the bank, but still bringing in good budget options, as McDermott and Bean have done throughout their tenure. They got A.J. Epinesa in round 2 of the draft, as well as some offensive weapons for Josh Allen, guys like Zach Moss, Gabe Davis, Isaiah Hodgins, and obviously the splash acquisition being Stephon Diggs, who's a true number 1 wide receiver for Josh Allen, 26 years old, under team control for the next 4 years. Overall, your thoughts on the Bills offseason?
I think you said it all, actually. It's been fantastic. I'm so excited. The only thing that I'm a little disappointed about is that we're not going to have the fans at these games and to experience this team. I mean, we could be poised for another start of another glory years period. Based on, I think sometimes you have to have a dramatic loss or a really disappointing loss in the playoffs to kind of give you that motivation to take the next step. I know the Bills had it during their glory years, and last year the Bills had a really heartbreaking loss against the Texans, and I'd love to see. I wish this were going to be a normal year because I'd love to see with the crowd how enthusiastic. I know how much that can mean to the Bills, but I think they had a great off season, and I'm looking forward to starting a new era of glory years, and it's going to be I think football, first and foremost, is great theaters, and a lot of it has to do with crowd noise and atmosphere, so I don't know if it's going to be the same without it, but I'll still be looking forward to it nonetheless.
Okay, so let's talk about, 91. I just got a couple games I'll throw out at you, and then you tell me what one jumps out at you if there's a different one. So 91, 15-4, 7-1 in the division. They win that again, 9-1 at home. Teams with winning records, they're 9-2. So here's a couple. Again, Week 3, Bills come out again firing on all cylinders. Put up a 52-burger on the Steelers, 52-34. Kelly throws for 6 touchdowns in that game. The Steelers finished 7-9, so weren't a great team, but weren't a horrible team. Week 4, struggled against Tampa Bay again, beating the Bucs 17-10. Bucs finished the year 3-13 again, so they weren't a great team. That game was tied 10-10 in the fourth quarter. Week 6, Bills get their first loss of the season against the Kansas City Chiefs, who were 3-2 at the time. Chiefs beat them pretty good, 33-6. Bills had 65 yards on the ground. Chiefs had 239. Christian Okoye, I remember him, the Nigerian Nightmare. He was a great running back. He ran for 122 yards. Week 12, again, and division games are tough. I get it. Bills go to Foxborough 10-1 and lose to, that's right, Dick McPherson. Love Dick from Syracuse University. That's why I fell in love with Syracuse University football. And the Pats, who were finished the season, they were actually 3-8 at the time. So a 10-1 Bills team going to a 3-8 Pats team, and they lose that game. Kelly was sacked 4 times. He threw 4 interceptions. Who was New England led by? Not Drew Bledsoe or anybody else. Yes, that's right. Hugh Millen. Hugh Millen was the quarterback in that game. They beat the Raiders in overtime, 30-27 in the regular season. A final regular season, and I wonder if you were at this game. I think this is a home game, and it was a loss in overtime, but it was against the Lions. Now, Detroit doesn't come to Buffalo very often, so I wonder if this was Barry's only trip to Rich Stadium. He had 108 yards and a TD. Didn't have a miraculous long run, but the stat says 20. And then, obviously, they get to the Super Bowl. Any of those games, any of the playoff games, or any of those games jump off the paper at you?
Actually, all of them do to some extent, but the Lions game, the Bills had actually secured home field advantage going into that game, so they rested a lot of their starters. And the Lions actually, if the Lions needed to win, if they won, they had a chance to win their division, depending on what happened on Monday night. So it was a big game for them. And I know there was a little controversy involving whether Marv Levy should have rested all of his starters, since the game had playoff ramifications for the Lions. But I remember it was a hard-fought game, and I was surprised that it even got to overtime. The Lions did win it, but that game ended, I believe it was the Bills' 17-game home winning streak, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. I'd have to double-check that, but I think they had a 17-game home winning streak snap with that loss. The Raiders game late in the season, that was a game where Scott Norwood missed a couple of field goal attempts that would have won the game before the Bills had to win it in overtime. That was another great game. The Steelers game you mentioned, I know Don Beebe actually had 4 touchdown receptions in that game for the Bills. Kelly threw 6, but Beebe had 4 of them. It was probably one of his best games as a Bill. The loss to the Patriots, I think that was probably the biggest upset. If it wasn't, it was. I still remember it, thinking, how did this happen? But like we said, it seems like week-to-week matchups, you just never know. Yep. And those are the things I remember about the games you just mentioned.
So the Bills do get revenge on the Chiefs, so they lose 33-6, but then in the playoffs, they come back and they beat the Chiefs pretty good in the postseason, so they get the revenge on that. Then the AFC title game, and again, a lot of people remember that Raiders blowout and everything, so I went back and looked. I think, what was it, that year it was the AFC title game. It was them in Denver, and I think they won like 10-7 or something, and the Bills didn't even score an offensive touchdown in that game. Is that correct?
You are absolutely right, and I believe Wade Phillips was the defensive coordinator for the Broncos. He really came up with a great game plan, and the Bills were off. The offense just was not in sync that whole afternoon, and like you said, the Bills' only touchdown was on a defensive interception. Elway went to it was an attempted screen pass near his own goal line. It was deflected by Jeff Wright, and Carlton Bailey, a linebacker, intercepted it and was able to elude Elway to get in the end zone. The Bills actually led 10-0 in that game in the fourth quarter. Norwood made a field goal to make it 10-0, and then Elway got injured, and Gary Kubiak, his backup, had to come in. And I thought, okay, this game's over. They're not. Right. He led them down the field to a touchdown. Then with less than a minute to go, or less than 2 minutes to go, they recovered the onside kick, and they were moving the ball. They were over They were over midfield. I thought, oh my God, we're going to lose this game. And then Kubiak completed a pass, and a defensive back for the Bills, I believe it was Kirby Jackson, stripped the ball from him after the completion, and I think it was Steve Sewell for the Broncos, caught it a running back, and he was able to strip him and make the tackle, and then make the recovery, and that's how the Bills got to the Super Bowl again. But I remember that game just being so tense. What is wrong with the offense? I think that was maybe one of the first times where you felt like somebody on the other, a coach on the other team really figured out how to defend no huddle.
So let's talk about this Super Bowl. Then I want to jump to a modern day question. So again, Giants had number one defense in 90. You could say the Bills beat them earlier in the season. So you could say the Bills should have won that game. I forgot to go and look at what was the point spread. But this Super Bowl, right? So they lose 37-24 against the Redskins. It actually probably isn't as close as the score indicates. Washington had the first number one offense in the league, 30 points per game. Second best defense, only giving up 14 points per game. Bills had 4 interceptions, 6 fumbles. They lost one of those. Bills only had 43 yards rushing. Obviously, Kelly had to throw 59 times. They were down early. They had to try to come back. The whole time they were down 24-0 at one point, trailed 37-10 at one point. The Redskins were favored by 7 points in that game. Now, I was a Redskins fan. Started in 82 when I was 6, just because they had a guy by the name of John Riggins, and they called him the Diesel, and there was guys dressed up like pigs in the stands for the Hogs. So I loved them. I loved Gibbs. I stopped loving them after Gibbs left. So I was a fan of the Redskins. So I was rooting for Rippon and the Redskins. When you look back at this, the Bills played horrible, and I get that. But honestly, they were probably an underdog in that game. I think, if that game had finished, 31-24 Redskins, I don't think people would have been surprised. I just think because the Bills played so badly, it kind of started building this stereotype of they can't win the big game.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that game, I think the Bills, they had gotten so close to winning the Super Bowl the year before that they just wanted to get redemption, and by winning. And I think they were a little tight. There were some turnovers early, and then there were turnover at the beginning of the second half, and the offense never, the no-huddle offense never clicked. They got away from the running game very too fast probably. Washington was the better team. There's no question about it. Washington was a better team that year. Yep. They gave the Bills trouble. They were a tough physical team. The Bills, they threw the ball a lot and had more of a finesse approach on offense, and they turned the ball over, a few too many times. You can sometimes get away with that against the, bad or mediocre teams. When you're playing a great team in the Super Bowl, it's just going to be hard to overcome. And I think just once they got behind the disappointment, the pressure of feeling like, oh my God, we're going to lose a second Super Bowl, right. I think it definitely had an effect on them, and they played tighter. And I totally agree with you that the game was not even as close as the final score would indicate. I know that when it was 24-10, Thurman Thomas thought, I read he thought that the Bills were going to come back because the Bills scored. They were down 24-0, made it 24-10. They thought that they were going to come back, but Washington got that ball back, went on a long drive. I think it was like 11, 12 play drive, and that was it. The dreams of a Super Bowl really were gone at that point. And,
it was tough. Like you said, it was. I think if they had gotten off to a better start and built some confidence, it could have certainly been closer. Sure. That's for sure. They were second in offense that year, 19th in defense. So before we go to the next year, I want to get your thoughts on and that was a good Redskins team, as I mentioned. They were first offense, second on defense. They only lost 2 games all year, and one of their losses was the final game of the regular season that they didn't care about. So that was a dominant team in a good NFC. So again, not a bad loss. It was just the way, unfortunately, the team lost. Let's talk about today. Now, you're a Buffalonian. You grew up a Buffalo Bills fan. So we've talked about this on the air. So a couple weeks ago, the executive director of Erie County comes out. He's not thrilled with New Era, with the PPP stuff. He says, I'm not going to call the Bills Stadium New Era Field anymore. I'm going to call it Ralph Wilson or whatever. Then shortly after that, the Bills and New Era decide to go their different ways. It looks like New Era is having financial issues. I actually thought it was because the Bills wanted to distance themselves from New Era, because if the county exec is unhappy and you eventually maybe want a new stadium in the county and you want some help, you want to make sure that you and the county are on the same page. But it looks like New Era, it was a mutual thing, and that New Era did wanted to get out of it. Now, there's been a lot of talk of who it might be. We read a story about some Tushy bidet company offering money and wanted to call it Tushy Stadium and hold a college football game there and call it the Toilet Bowl. A lot of people think Buffalo Wild Wings would be a perfect fit for the stadium. Some want it to go back to Rich Stadium. Some people want it to go back to the Ralph. Some people want to call it the Rock Pile. Do you have any suggestions? What would you like to call it? Or if you were saying to a friend you're going, to a Bills game in October, you're going to what? The Bills football stadium? What would you like to call it?
I think I don't know if you mentioned this, the county executive, I think he wants it to be called Veterans Stadium.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I did hear that, yeah.
So I would be happy with something like that. It doesn't have to be corporate. If it is corporate, I would want it to be something that seemed kind of cool. New Era was kind of a cool name and a cool brand. Tushy is not going to work. I'm sorry.
And you know what? They probably had they had probably no real inclination to even do it. But boy, did it got some bump on social media. If anything,
that was a great whoever did that was a great PR move. You're right.
They probably had nowhere near the money to even do it, but to even just throw it out there got them a lot of free mentions by idiots like me on the radio to just talk about it as fodder. So, your thoughts on so that will be interesting to see going forward. You will have to say, now, what about a new state? So we looked it up again. So it's been in existence since 73. We looked it up. So Rich Stadium, we went back and looked at this. You want to talk about a good deal. Ralph was a little bit ahead of his time. I mean, I think of naming rights as a little more 2000s, but Ralph signed this naming rights with Rich Products in 1973. Now, I mean, you got to give Ralph credit. He is a man of his word. 1973, they signed this deal. 25 years, and they're paying, I think it came out to $60,000 a year. So in 1997, Chris, Rich Products is still paying the same amount for the naming rights that they did in 1973. I mean, most organizations probably would have went back and said, "Hey, we need to renegotiate this. You got to pay a lot more for these naming rights," but they didn't. So you got to give Ralph credit. He was ahead of his time with the naming rights. But we looked it up, and the Bills are actually, now that the Oakland Coliseum is getting retired, the Bills will now be the fourth oldest stadium in the National Football League. Do you believe, and I know there's been a lot of talk, and obviously in this pandemic, it's probably not a great time. I mean, do you foresee the Bills getting a new stadium at some point, or are they, you think, pretty much locked in for the long haul at this stadium?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, I didn't know that they were still paying the Rich Products was still paying the same amount every year up until 97. That's a really interesting fact. When that stadium was built, it was state of the art because it was a football only stadium. It actually held 80,000 fans, and was hard to get. It hurt Buffalo to a certain extent because it was hard to sell out in time. You had to have, back then you had to have a sellout 72 hours in advance, and it was hard for us to sell. We had, other stadiums had 50, 55,000, and they were getting full sellouts. We had to have 80, so it was a big difference. And but now I think it's 72,000. They've done a lot of renovations to it over the years to make it, keep it from falling into disrepair and to maintain the standards necessary to play in the NFL. I've heard talk about new stadiums. I think eventually one will get done, and ideally that stadium is about 25 minutes outside of the city of Buffalo in a suburban area. So I think they would love to have, if they could, a stadium in the heart of the city somewhere.
Yep.
And because we've got a lot of pieces of the waterfront has come back. The Pagulas who own the Sabres and the Bills, they've done a lot of stuff down by the waterfront, and they've got the arena down there, and they built some other stuff around there. And so if you could add a stadium down there somewhere at some point, that would be awesome. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think the stadium that they play in now, whatever it's going to be called, is still a great place to watch a football game.
Yeah.
The sight lines are great, and you get, wherever you sit, you still have a great view of the field and the stadium and the action. So I don't if they have to keep playing it where they are now, I'm completely fine with that too.
Yeah, like you said, it's not in shambles. On the phone with us, Chris Stucchio. He's got a great book, The Buffalo Bills Game-by-Game Summary. Before we go to Tanner for his last question, Chris, just go ahead and once again tell people where they can grab this.
The book is available. The title of the book is Buffalo Football, a Game-by-Game Summary of the Glory Years, and it's available on Amazon.
Okay, terrific. Go ahead, Tanner. Your last question for Chris here.
So obviously the big question for the Bills today is Josh Allen. Now, he did what he had to do from year 1 to year 2, which was show improvement. We're going to need a bit of a steeper jump from year 2 to year 3, but what he did last year was a good sign, and I think Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have done an absolutely phenomenal job making Allen's life as easy as possible. You look at the continuity in the coaching staff. Josh has had the same offensive coordinator, Brian Daboll, for his entire time there. There's continuity on the offensive line. The starters from last year project to be the same this year. The construction of the roster, you could say Buffalo's skill position core has gone from bottom 5 Allen's rookie year to top 5 this year with Diggs, Brown, Beasley, and Motor Singletary as well. The fact that they put together a top 5 defense arguably as well. So I think they've done everything right for Josh Allen, but it's up to him to prove that he's the guy at this point. And if he's not, then he's not. I personally think he is. But with all that said, do you think that Josh Allen is the franchise quarterback that the Bills have coveted since Kelly pretty much?
Yeah, I love Josh Allen. I really do think he's going to be that guy. I love his competitiveness. Well, he's got a great arm, but I love his leadership, his competitiveness, his fearlessness. Those things remind me of Jim Kelly. And people forget when he came in his rookie year, a lot of people thought because of where he played in college that a lot of the experts didn't think he should play for a couple of years. But he was forced into action his rookie year, and he held his own. And then last year he got the Bills to the playoffs, and he wasn't, you look at the stats, he maybe was near the bottom third of the league from a lot of quarterback stats, but fourth quarter quarterback rating, when it mattered most, he really elevated his play, plus he made some great runs and did some things that other quarterbacks would never do as far as sacrificing their body to pick up yards, and the team loves him for that. You can't underestimate how important that is for the team camaraderie, I think, and I look forward to seeing I have a Josh Allen jersey. I had one jersey in the 1990s. It was a Thurman Thomas jersey, and I have one jersey now. It's a Josh Allen jersey. So I think he's going to be great. Yeah.
No doubt, and it's a quarterback league. You go as your quarterback goes. So 92, they're 14-6, 5-3 in the AFC East. They go 7-2 at home. Games decided by one score or less. 6-2 against winning teams. 9-4. They're third offensively, 14th defensively. Again, just a couple games I'll throw out at you, and then you tell me if any of these jump out. A lot of people still talk about that Week 2 game at Candlestick. 49ers, Giants, 34-31. A ton of offense. The Bills put up 488. The Niners 598. It was a back and forth exciting game if you loved offense. Week 6, loss at the LA Raiders 20-3. Bills were a 9.5 point favorite, and I do know that it's hard to go from the East Coast to West Coast and West Coast to East Coast. Bills ran the ball for 92 yards, threw 45 times, 300 yards and an interception. Another bad loss was Week 13 at home against a bad Jets team. The Jets were 3-9. Bills lose 24-17, and the Bills were a 10.5 point favorite in that game. Following week, they lose again to a bad team, 5-7 Colts, 16-13 in overtime. Kelly 11 for 33, 184 and 2 picks. The Bills were a 16.5 point favorite in that game. Now I will give them credit; they had a big game against New Orleans. They were a 3.5 point underdog going to New Orleans, who was 11-3 at the time, number one defense, and the Bills came away with a 20-16 win. And then last regular season game against Houston, and we've had some of the players on to talk about this, obviously, in the playoff game. Don Beebe, Steve Christie. They get blown out in Houston. I know injuries were a big part of that. 27-3. Kelly and Reich got sacked 7 times, 3 interceptions. That Houston defense was just beating them up big time. And then, of course, we all remember the wild card game, the greatest comeback. Next following week, they get revenge on the Oilers, 41-38 in overtime. They totally dismantle Pittsburgh in the next round, 24-3, and then they beat Miami again fairly handedly, 29-10. Might have been one of the best AFC title games for Bills fans, just squishing the fish in that AFC title game, 29-10, and then the Super Bowl. But any of those games specifically stood out at you when you were doing this book?
Actually, yeah, the 49ers game that you mentioned, that Week 2 game, that was the first time that there were no punts in an NFL game.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I think that's still the only time there have been no punts in an NFL game by either team.
That's incredible.
The Jets game you mentioned later in the year, well, the Bills in 92, they struggled. 1990, they were the best team in football, in my opinion. 91, they were definitely the best team in the AFC. I think the Redskins were probably a better team than they lost to in the Super Bowl. 92, the Bills struggled at times during the regular season, and they didn't win the division. That's the only year during the glory year, or the only time during the glory years they didn't win the division. They struggled. There were times they looked vulnerable, and you mentioned that Jets loss later in the year, the 3-9 Jets. The Jets were in that game. They wanted to win for that. I don't know if you remember this, but their defensive lineman Dennis Byrd, his legs were paralyzed a week before against Kansas City during a game, and so they had this. They really wanted to win that game for them, and it was a dramatic game because the Bills got the ball back late with a chance to go ahead, and I think it was Brian Washington, a safety or defensive back. He intercepted a pass and returned it for a touchdown. It was a shocking defeat for the Bills. And at some level, though, I was sort of happy for the Jets because, you know what I mean? Yeah, it was hard to be too disappointed because they really played awesome that day. And I also remember the playoff game against Houston. Yeah. I just remember how fast the Bills got back into it. It was like less than 7 minutes of playing time. They went down from being down 35-3, and it was 35-31. Yeah,
I mean, they couldn't do anything wrong. Again, we had Steve Christie on. They kicked the onside after scoring there in the third quarter, and it was bing bang boom. I mean, they were right back. They were right back into it fairly quickly, like you said. And then the Super Bowl. So again, Cowboys were a great team. Cowboys were favored by 6.5. They were the second best offense, fifth best defense. Obviously, the Leon Lett play. That's what everybody remembers. Final score was 52-17. Again, though, Bills did not play well. Again, if this was a 17-10 game in favor of the Cowboys, again, maybe the perspective is different. Kelly threw 4 interceptions. Bills had 9 turnovers. Aikman had 4 touchdowns. So again, if just like the Washington game, Chris, I think if it was a little closer, maybe the narrative is different. But again, I think the Bills were getting so tight in those things, and when they started getting down early, things just snowballed on them.
I agree. I do think that 92 Super Bowl season when they played the Cowboys the first time, I thought, they were a team of destiny because they had a big comeback against Houston Houston at the time. And I felt like the Bills actually led that Super Bowl 7-0 on a touchdown by Thurman Thomas. Yep. But then, the Cowboys got a couple of quick touchdowns. The Bills, it was 14-10, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it just got so far out of hand. And I do think the confidence factor that you mentioned, that once Dallas started to gain control, things started to snowball, and I think it became psychological on some level. And I do feel like also the Bills. I know that Jimmy Johnson, the coach of the Cowboys at the time, he felt that the Bills, although they were a really good and talented team, that they could turn the ball over a lot. He felt he had the type of defense that could force turnovers, and he felt that they were going to win that game because of turnovers, and he was right.
Yeah.
That was the key to the game. They both had 9 turnovers.
Yep. Yeah, it was like you said, and it got off to a great start. And as you said, it felt like it was a team of destiny. And then finally, the '93 team, they go 14-6, 7-1 in the division, 6-2 at home, 6-1 in games decided by 1 point or less. They're 7th in offense, 5th in defense. Just a couple games. Again, I forget this, but week 2 they get some revenge on Dallas. They beat them 13-10 early on in the season, so a little bit of revenge. Week 8, they go to New England and they win in overtime, 13-10. It's Parcells' first year in New England. Bills were a 9.5-point favorite in that game. The next week they lose 23-0. Not a great game there. Week 13 at Kansas City, lost 23-10. Week 14, lost to the LA Raiders in a close game, 25-24. And then they get into the postseason, obviously, and they beat KC in the AFC title game, 30-13. Craig in Montana sacked 4 times and picked off twice, essentially ending Montana's career, and then into the Super Bowl. Any games in the '93 season before we get to the Super Bowl that jumped out at you?
Well, you mentioned that Cowboys game. That was I still remember that game. That was Dick Enberg had the call for NBC, and Emmitt Smith was in a contract dispute with the Cowboys. He did not play in that game, and I remember that loss. Charles Haley was so upset afterwards. I think he did something in the locker room that you're not supposed to do, throwing time. But that is why they signed. They made sure they signed Emmitt Smith after that.
Right.
And, the Bills actually that year, believe it or not, in that year they beat the Cowboys, the Redskins, and the Giants.
Wow.
In the regular season. So it was the 3 teams that had beaten them in the Super Bowl. And I remember someone asked Cornelius Bennett about it, and he's like, well, I'd rather have the 3 rings
Exactly.
these regular season wins. But I also remember the Raiders playoff game that year, which I went to. That was one of the coldest games in NFL history. It was the temperature was about 0, and the wind chill was, I think, minus 20 or 30 at times, and it was tough. The Bills were down at halftime, and it looked like the Raiders were going to win that playoff game at some point. But that was a divisional round game, and then once they got past the Raiders, they were able to come back and win that game. And then, like you said, against Kansas City, they sacked Montana pretty hard once, and essentially, I think, ended his career.
Yeah.
And once he was out of the game, the Bills were good. We knew. I kind of knew that the Bills were going to win, and then they ran. Thomas had a great day running the ball that day, and he thought, okay, we're going back one more time. We got a shot.
and some people thought maybe the best shot. Now you go up against the Cowboys. They're second in offense and defense. They're a 10.5-point favorite. Final score 30-13. Kelly goes 31 for 50, 260 and an interception. Had 87 yards on the ground. Bills had 3 turnovers. Aikman threw for 207 and had an interception. But again, a very good Cowboys team. And again, a lot of people felt that this was maybe the game that the Bills, outside of maybe that 90 team, could have won. Because it wasn't a blowout like the last 2 that seemed to kind of get away from them early in the first half. Did you at halftime? Did you think maybe you had a shot at this one?
Absolutely, and the 1990 Super Bowl, there was only 1 week between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl, and that was the way it was in '93. Mm-hmm. So I thought maybe that without the extra week, and it's more of a normal routine, that would give the Bills a better chance of winning. And they led 13-6 at halftime. And Aikman the week before in the NFC Championship game, he suffered a bad concussion, and there's parts of the Super Bowl he doesn't remember.
Right.
And he wasn't the same. And I thought, we're going to win this game. And then the Bills got the ball to start the second half up 13-6, and they're moving the ball, and then Thurman Thomas fumbled, and it was returned for a touchdown. And I mean, I'm telling you, you could almost see that the Bills, it was like that they almost knew that it was inevitable they were going to lose that game at that moment. They just never were the same team after that, and Dallas kind of took control. And it was still a 1-score game for a while. The Bills, I still thought, but they stopped doing things on offense the way they had to move the ball before. And like you said, I think once confidence becomes a factor, and that return, that defensive return for a touchdown really changed that game and changed all the momentum. Because Buffalo was really controlling that Super Bowl for the first half. Yeah. And I did think that they were going to. I thought, we're going to do it. Maybe that was my mistake, right?
That's right. So So let me just throw a couple stats out at you, and then we'll cut you loose. Again, just to kind of pound home the dominance. Again, the 4 Super Bowl losses. Again, I think against 4 really great teams. It's not like they lost to an 8-8 team that was a Cinderella story that got into the playoffs, and it was just great Cinderella run. It was some real good teams. They just unfortunately didn't play well. I think if these were all real nip and tuck games and right down to the end, like the '90s Super Bowl, perception would have been different. But I think because there was so many turnovers and they're kicking the ball around that, they got laughed at a little bit more. But now in hindsight, people, look back and say, boy, that was a pretty incredible run. Total record overall from 88 to 93, 80-33, 39-9 in the East. So again, extremely dominant. 47-7 at home, 33-26 on the road, 37-21 against teams with winning records. And I'll ask you which one of these is a fan or doing the book impressed you the most. Games decided by one score, 33-11. Now, I thought, well, what about NFC teams? Well, during the regular season, they were 17-8 against NFC teams. And then games decided by 3 points or less, or when they had 3 points or less. In that run, the Bills only 2 times. When they had 6 points or less in a game, 6 times. And only 1 shutout that entire time. The only time they got shut out, Chris, was in 93, 23-0 at Pittsburgh. So, again, I think it goes back to how dominant they were. It was difficult to keep the Bills off the board through that run. Any of those numbers really jump out at you that really kind of hammers home how dominant they were?
Well, I do remember that shutout you mentioned. That was a Monday night game. Pittsburgh was on the road against Pittsburgh, and they really were very physical. I think 3 Bills starters went out of that game with an injury, and it was, you realize that it was amazing that they could have so much success for such a long period of time. The thing that jumps out at me, I would say, is they appeared in the AFC title game 5 out of 6 years. Mm-hmm. It would have been 6 out of 6 if Ronnie Harmon makes a catch that he was fully capable of making. He was a very good pass catching running back, and 4 Super Bowls in 6 years and 5 division titles in 6 years. I mean, that is just an amazing run of success. So all the numbers I think you said kind of speak to the overall success they had as a team, which you can kind of see with the accomplishments I just mentioned.
And again, the book is just incredible. You can get it, and again, it really breaks it down. And you did a great job of going and getting comments and stuff about some of the games. Finally, as a current Bills fan, your thoughts on the current owners, the Pegulas. Now, we just had Tim Graham on from The Athletic a couple weeks ago. He did a pretty in-depth story on the organization. They're suffering just like a lot of people during this pandemic. He did a story on what he called toxic culture. He had a lot of sources inside the Bills organization. He got comments from Kim Pegula. There was concerns of sexual harassment, friends and family people getting hired in positions they shouldn't. The Pegulas overextending themselves with the Sabres, with AHL hockey teams and lacrosse teams, with their hospitality company, and with the Pegulas letting the staff know that, I think it was number 3 or number 4 on their list when they were having, meetings, was keeping the family's lifestyle intact, which obviously kind of irked some of the people in the front office who, maybe aren't making millions and millions of dollars. So it was a real in-depth journalistic piece by Tim Graham. And I think, Chris, if this was done in any other place, probably gets way more run and way more attention. But because Buffalo maybe is a medium to small market, I think it kind of flew underneath the radar. And again, a lot of it I don't want to say unsubstantiated, but people leaving and staffers not told why and all of that stuff. And I told this to Tim, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but I'm not a diehard Bills fan. I'm not from here, so I think sometimes people want the Bills here. Ralph wanted the team to stay here. The Pegulas made sure the team stayed here along with the Sabres. So I think sometimes as a Buffalo Bills fan, you have to say, geez, do I want someone who maybe isn't the greatest owner of all time and have an NFL team? Or am I going to say, these guys aren't good enough, and then someone's going to come in and maybe take the team away. Obviously, they've started to win. They've gotten to the postseason. But, there was talk that, people are starting to feel like the Bills aren't their first priority and that, maybe that's going to bleed over to the Bills from the hospitality and the Sabres part of it. As a fan or as a media member, what are your thoughts towards the Pegulas and PSE?
Well, I don't know a lot of the specifics, but I personally just love the Pegulas. I think they kept the Buffalo Bills here. They bought the team, and they've done a lot for this area overall and helped revitalize the waterfront area. And they've done a lot of things for this community. And I don't know what's being said, and I don't have any personal knowledge. I don't know the Pegulas, but I just I love what they've done to help the city, and they appear to be doing everything they can to make the Bills a winning franchise, the team I love so much. And so the fact that they kept them here when there was a chance that they could leave, and they seem to be doing everything they can and fully committed to winning. And it's anything I've ever read, from about the Pegulas, that they want to win. And it seems like that they do what they've given the organization everything it's needed to try to win. So I don't know anything beyond that. I'm just going to say, I love the Pegulas.
Well, and you certainly can't argue. I mean, they've brought in McDermott, who looks like he's a good hire. They're not afraid to go out and get free agents. That you can hang that on other owners and franchises that they're not willing to go out and spend. Ralph for a while was a little stingy there at the end, though. He started to open up the pocketbook to try to bring people to Buffalo, Fitzpatrick, that Mario Williams deal. But they go out and get Stephon Diggs, and so they're certainly investing. They're not doing what some owners do, where you can just make hands full of money and not be a winning organization. So I definitely think they want to win. So you can't accuse them of that. There's no doubt about it. Chris, one more time, go ahead and tell people where they can grab this amazing book.
Hey, thank you very much. The title of the book is Buffalo Football, a game-by-game summary of the glory years, and it's available on Amazon right now. And
your prediction this year, record, and is it a Super Bowl year?
12-4, and I would say this is the year they make it to the title game, and I think they have to have one more disappointment before they get to the Super Bowl.
well, listen, Chris, I appreciate it. I hope for you and my 17-year-old son's sake, who's a Bills fan, that they do that and that they eventually do bring home the Lombardi to Buffalo. Have yourself a great day. Continued success and health to you and your family.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you so much. A great book. Again, just a lot of legwork that went into what he did. It's extremely impressive, the information he gathered, the research he did to get some post-game comments, and really breaks it down. And it kind of, you want to go, walk down memory lane and not just remember the Super Bowls, but the build-up, the season, the journey of the season, each of those years. It's just a great walk down memory lane. You're stuck in the house. You can't do stuff. Just a great read. If you have a Buffalo Bills fan in your family, it is a terrific birthday, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Thanksgiving, anniversary present for sure. All right, we're late. Let's take a break. It's 92.1 The Team.